Ok, pues hoy vamos a hablar sobre la brecha de género en la industria aeronáutica, cómo afecta y cómo se ha estado manejando a lo largo del tiempo. Aquí tenemos a Alex, que es un experto y nos va a hablar sobre este tema.
So, what we heard, or what we have researched about this topic is that the the gender gap that exists in this industry is one that's more exaggerated than in other industries because it exists everywhere, right? But
Ujú.
it's sort of more exaggerated in this sector for a bunch of different reasons that range from social to administrative to even just the economic conditions that different groups of people tend to live in.
Ok, pues según los datos, ¿nos podrías dar un porcentaje aproximado de de las mujeres que están en la industria aeronáutica?
Well, in globally, the participation of women in this industry is only about 6%, which is really not very high at all. And in our country, in Mexico, it's even worse, right? With the participation being 5%. And obviously, this indicates there's not a lot of women in this field, right? Which, as I was saying before,
Ujú.
this industry is one of the least gender diverse in general in the world, right?
Sí, sí, es muy impactante que solo el 6% lo tenga.
Yeah, it's almost nobody.
Entonces,
Hmm.
sí, sí, sí. ¿En qué roles o en qué trabajos son en los que son menos, ah, en los que están más eh, debajo?
Mhm. Okay. Well, the roles that women are especially like not represented in, right, are the ones that are sort of considered the most technically skilled, the most sort of top of the line, creme of the crop sort of roles in the industry, right? That being
Ujú,
pilots, flight engineers and maintenance technicians, right? Because these sorts of key roles, as I said before, they sort of they're very flashy and they're usually the best paid in this sector, right? And this sort of underrepresentation in these fields means that women tend to be funneled into more sideline positions like support or administrative, rather than the more sort of core, central, operational foundations of this industry.
mm, ok, ok. Entonces, por lo que dijiste, la diferencia del salario que
Mm.
existe entre los pilotos hombres y las mujeres, ¿qué tan marcada es?
Well, as I said before, right, that this sort of industry is kind of the worst when it comes to this,
Ujú,
especially when it comes to pilots, right? Because according to a study from Select Aviation, there's a really big pay disparity, right? Like female pilots earn way less than their counterparts, like 26% less, which is like really
oh,
like, yeah, that's like really crazy low compared to, because
dije,
there's other pay gaps in all sorts of industries, right? But like this
ujú,
one is kind of the worst, right? Because 26
sí.
is like wow, you know, like that's really high, you know, even by others, sort of, even comparing other pay gaps.
Sí, pues como tú lo mencionaste, casi no se ha visto mujeres pilotos debido a la gran diferencia que dijiste. Y por eso he escuchado, investigué también que hay programas que han intentado aumentar el porcentaje de la presencia de las mujeres como pilotos o ingenieras en la industria aeronáutica. Esto fue, según yo, por Esmeralda Vasco Ruiz en 1990.
Testimony. There has been an increase of women as pilots specifically from that time frame, which was from 1990, I think, to now to 2025. The increase has been about 4%, which is not a lot, especially over 35 years. It's really not that much, which kind of shows that slow change of pace that this industry has. Maybe not technologically, right? Because this place flies when it literally, like, pun not intended, flies when it comes to technology, right? But when it comes to sort of the social aspects of the industry, man, there is not a lot of change that happens here, right? And this figure really, really shows that there must be a lot of barriers preventing women from entering this sector.
Ok, sí, sí. Como tú lo dijiste, es una gran diferencia. Entonces, ahora vamos a pasar con las preguntas de análisis que son un poco más centradas o más específicas. Pues primero vamos a empezar sobre cuáles son las principales causas culturales y estructurales que limitan la participación de las mujeres en la industria.
Well, there are two main causes that limit participation by women in this industry. The first one is, as I mentioned before, the culture, right? And it's an issue everywhere, right? That, men have historically been very sort of prevalent in industries like this, in more sort of engineering focused industries. Men have always been very, very prevalent, right? Which creates a culture, maybe not direct rejection, but it's not the most welcoming either, and it does kind of keep the stereotype going that these sorts of mechanical and technical professions are only for men, right? Which, I mean, is something that kind of gets into people's heads at a very young age, right? Which does kind of change how they think about people who belong in these fields. And again, this sort of culture is a bit, I'd have to say, is more exacerbated here in Mexico, right? Because it's definitely more pronounced, that culture of men being only in mechanical and technical professions. And the second cause is less cultural and more structural, right? Which are sort of the things stopping women from getting into this industry that sort of relate to the system, right? Things like a lack of female role models in these sorts of technical positions, right? Because, like, I think when you imagine pilot or flight engineer or a maintenance technician in your head, I think you imagine a woman, right? Maybe you do. That's great, right? But I think you ask any other person, it's going to be a guy, right? And these sorts of lack of role models make it hard for women, younger women, who want a career path or who are open to different career paths. It makes it difficult for them to sort of see that their gender is welcome in this industry, right? And again, the sort of work environment that's predominantly made up by men, it's ultimately it can seem unwelcoming, right? And it can cause, or it can lead to more workplace safety issues for women, like ultimately leading to things like harassment, right? In an environment like this that can appear hostile, And again, in our country, I feel like those sorts of issues are a bit more prevalent. And also, economic barriers exist for all of us, right? But again, as I've said, pay gaps exist in every industry, right? And so those sorts of economic barriers can hold women back, because these usually the training for anything in this industry, right, is pricey, right? And especially pilot training. Like, have you seen how much it costs to become a pilot? Like, that costs an exorbitant amount of money, right? And that sort of filter, even though it affects all of us, right, because of the economic barriers that women face uniquely, it can affect them disproportionately.
Ok, sí, sí. Algo que mencionaste es muy importante en eso, que nos lleva a la siguiente pregunta. Es sobre el acoso, que dijiste que por el tipo de convivencia que se tiene ahí en los trabajos, ¿qué impacto tiene el acoso y las cuestiones de la seguridad laboral en la participación de las mujeres?
Well, this isn't exclusive to this industry, but again, as I've said before, this is something that is kind of unfortunately common in this industry because of just because of the difference of how many like the ratio between men and women who work here, but the sort of even just the threat or the idea of the possibility of being harassed creates
Mhm.
a really unsafe work environment, right? Because, like, I mean, if you thought that you might be harassed or even abused, right, in your workplace, I mean, you wouldn't feel very valued. You wouldn't feel like you belong there, and it can make you feel stressed, right? Like it can be a huge
Sí,
aspect of stress, right? Which, I mean, affects satisfaction for the person, and also for everyone in general. It can affect productivity, you know. It can affect the bottom line of companies, right? And I mean, these people who have training, who have, you know, willingness to be in this industry, they can choose to leave this sector altogether for other ones that seem more open to women as a whole, right? So I mean, it's something that unfortunately women do have to consider when entering this field, is that it can be, you know, the environment can be hostile, you know, and that can be a
sí.
factor in choosing this career path.
Exacto, eso que dijiste sobre que las personas que están ahí por sus sueños, que otra persona se los quite, ya sea
Mm-hmm.
acosándolas o de cualquier otra manera, es
Mm-hmm.
horrible porque no te sientes seguro, tú lo mencionaste, y es algo súper importante en ese ámbito porque como la carrera es pues, difícil, agregarle eso del eh, pues, estar hostil todo el tiempo es horrible. Entonces, todo eso que hemos hablado debe tener consecuencias. Así que ahora vamos a ir con las preguntas sobre las consecuencias. ¿Cuáles son las principales consecuencias económicas de la brecha de género?
Very different economic downsides to having like a sort of lack of diversity in general in any sort of field, right? And it's that,
Ujú,
you know, uh, these women are people who have novel ideas, who have a lot of, as I said before, who have a lot of willingness to work in this field, right? And that sort of perspective that they might bring to this field can, maybe it isn't harnessed to its full extent because they aren't willing to work in a hostile industry, right? It can limit
ujú,
innovation as a whole, right? And especially
exacto.
reputation of workplaces, right? Because, like, I mean, this stuff gets out. Like, even if it isn't reported on that much, word spreads, you know, and that can really harm a company's bottom line if it really gets hard enough, you know. And I mean, drawing from such a limited talent pool, because, like, I mean, the aeronautical industry, it's big, but it's not the most massive one, you know? And so that's why I feel like it is important for there to be as much people as possible, right? Because the more people, the more skill and talent and perspective can be brought in, you know? And that leads to more innovation, better solutions, stuff like that. But without it, you know, the industry can stagnate, you know, risk management can get worse, you know, and ultimately it just becomes a disadvantage, you know, in globally competing against the rest of the market.
Ok, sí, justo lo que entendí es que como se restringe mucho la participación de la mujer, puede afectar a las empresas y la innovación que pueden llegar a tener y también la toma de decisiones que se llegan a tener entre ellos. Y como tú dijiste, no es una ah, o sea, área muy grande, pero que no está tan exagerado como para eso. Así que todo esto que nos está afectando debe tener unas soluciones de las políticas y pues, obviamente de las mejores maneras. Así que tú, ¿qué nos propones para reducir esa brecha de género que tenemos?
I feel like there's a lot of, obviously, because this issue is multifaceted, right? We also have to
Ujú,
have multiple different strategies with different measures to aid more people in general getting into this industry, but especially women. Right? And as I said before, the fact that these sorts of programs cost a lot. Financial support programs or even scholarships, right? Those are super helpful for people who are willing to learn, right?
sí,
Because if you really truly want to get into this industry, a scholarship is an amazing thing, right? Also, taking more care earlier on, you know, having campaigns and events showing everyone in general, you know, how women can exist in this industry, right? How it's not just completely male dominated, right? How if anybody wants to work in this industry, why should your gender be a obstacle, right? That's an idea that should be expressed to women very early on. And also, when it comes to the workplace, there should be definitely a lot of policy measures there, right? Especially when it comes to harassment. Because, like, I mean, sometimes the rules can be fairly vague, and maybe it isn't really understood because, again, everyone's men, right? So there needs to be really very clear codes, or really clear rules on what can and cannot be done, you know, and punishments that go along with it, right? And not just that, also sort of dealing with the sort of structural issues. Things like diversity plans, you know, with set objectives, you know, promoting hiring transparency, you know, stuff like that, so people can really see what the hiring process is like, right? Because all that sort of stuff can make the biases that do exist clearer, right? And by making them clearer, you know, we can help get rid of them.
Pues sí, lo dijiste, las becas que están dando ayudan demasiado a que más mujeres intenten adentrarse en este mundo aeronáutico, y también la difusión, las campañas que están haciendo con los niños y niñas, que por ejemplo una que investigué es mujeres en STEM, que han hecho equipos de robótica, de competencias en la NASA sobre cualquiera de esas cosas, pero con un equipo de mujeres, que obviamente atrae más público y hace que se vaya quitando poco a poco esa brecha. Así que, en tu opinión, ya para finalizar, ¿qué es lo que podría tener mayor impacto para esto y por qué?
Mayor impacto is in, what do you mean? Like, as in, what can we do to help change the industry for the better?
Sí.
Well, I feel like the sort of best conditions that we can provide to really change the industry is things that are long running and that are systemic, you know what I mean? Because, like, I mean, if you create just some one-off initiative with some vague objective, you're not really going to achieve much, you know what I mean? The changes that really do, you know, affect things are ones that have a lot of commitment to them by institutions, by organizations, by really influential people, and are ones that are monitored and checked constantly, right? Because, like, as I said, you know, these conditions, these changes have to be long term, and they have to be really deeply embedded into business strategies and into the corporations as a whole. Because if they aren't, ultimately these things can just kind of be superficial and might not change things. So ensuring that the things that we do change, the conditions that we do make, last, and that we actually, you know, focus on them and ensure that they do actually occur.
Ok, sí, yo creo que te hiciste una gran alternativa, o bueno, una gran solución, y pues agradezco tu participación, tu conocimiento sobre este tema. Y pues nos vemos para el siguiente. Bueno, ya.
Pues ya, ni modo. Bye bye.